Commercial property inspections contain some element of structure and some element of foundation inspection, whether you're in a basement or you're on a slab or you're in a multi-story. When you're doing the exterior of the inspection, looking at the foundation, that should be the start of your structural evaluation of this building. So when I'm talking about the foundation, I'm looking for areas that are going to give us issue. Wood to ground contact, areas with poor drainage, areas that are cracking, and areas that are just no longer square or plumb. So we're going to look for those as we walk through the exterior of this foundation. Your foundation inspection, your structural inspection is walking around the perimeter of the building. And so what I'm watching for is, again, that wood to ground contact. This mulch, it's got enough space, it looks good here, and I would want to wash that through the entire property. If that mulch was up against the siding material, that would be a conducive condition that I would want to watch for. Then I'm going to try to watch and look in my inspection at this concrete that's visible. And I'm going to follow the contour of the ground and follow the concrete that's visible through this entire exterior of the building, looking for cracks, looking for missing elements, looking for dangerous situations. This is poured concrete, and so I want to make sure that there's nothing dangerous on it. And if there is a crack, identifying whether that crack has got a structural bearing on the building or whether that crack is just a typical crack present in concrete. But that's what I would be looking for as I walk around the exterior of this building performing a foundation inspection. In this case, I don't see anything unusual or anything that's got my ears highlighted on this section of the building. Another key element with every building is water drainage. We talk about water drainage throughout the entire ComSOP, and in this particular case, is the water sloping away from the building, or is the water going to go back in the building? And in this case, it's sloping nicely away, but we need to make sure all the sides look the same. Let's go check out the other side of the building and see what we have there. Being thorough is very important in your inspection. So if we've turned this corner here, we come over this way, I'm just going to follow my path to make sure I don't miss anything. And then I've met with this well, and this well has a grate on it, and it's important that we make sure the grate is solid, that it doesn't look like there's going to be a pedestrian issue of somebody falling in this deep hole. This is actually the emergency exit and emergency escape for the basement. But yet we have this huge grate, so I want to make sure that's intact. I watch the foundation. And then the idea of being thorough should also happen in your report. So in my report, I would mention that I can't see the foundation in this area behind the vegetation. And so identifying that and letting your client know the areas that are seen and not seen should be just as important as identifying any issues. And again, on this side of the building, I don't have any noteworthy issues other than letting my client know that this area is under vegetation and not visible. We've transitioned to the interior of the building, and we're here in the lower area called the basement. I mean, everybody's got a different name for it, but we'll call it a basement. When you look at the structure of a building, you start thinking of all the basic elements of part of structure. We have the perimeter support system. Now what that typically is the foundation and the footing. We have the inner support system, which are the beams and the columns. We have the floor structure, which is the floor of the wood and everything else above us, and then we have the roof structure. Today, we're going to concentrate on the perimeter support system and the inner support system. We're going to look a little bit at the floor support, but largely in this building, the beams, the columns, and the floor support are all encapsulated in drywall, and they're not visible. An inspector should just take a picture of it, note that it's not visible, and then look for anything extraordinary. I would also extend the idea that you should look at the very basic principles of structure going plumb, level, square, and straight, and keeping those in our minds as we're looking at all of these structural systems. So let's go over and look at the foundation and the perimeter support system a little closer. So unless otherwise noted or otherwise observed, most concrete foundations are considered to be monolithic. Monolithic being all one piece. In this case, it would be all one pour. So I've got this concrete wall that ribbons around the entire perimeter of this building. And it was poured in one day at one time with a series of several concrete trucks. And so I'm going to look at this wall and I'm going to look for, is it plumb, up and down? Is it straight all the way across? Is there any bowing? Is there any movement? That's kind of the first key that I'm looking for as I'm doing my foundation inspection. Then the next, and probably you're thinking, why do you do this first? I like to look at structure first because I've already, during my preliminary walkthrough, if you've done one, identified moisture. I don't see any moisture down here, but I would look. And so when I see a crack, and I've got my first crack on the wall right here. When I see a crack, I have to attempt to identify what type of crack it is. And basically I separate cracks into a couple different places. One, is it just an expansion or a thermal crack? Two, is it a structural crack? And three, is it a movement crack? Typically, a crack like this, which is moderately serrated, even up and down the wall in width, doesn't show evidence of movement, is a shrinkage or a thermal crack. It's a pretty typical crack. It's a crack that happens with all concrete, especially poured concrete. If this crack was wider at the top than it is at the bottom, it would be a crack that's moving. If it's wider at the bottom than it is at the top, it's a crack that's moving. And so that would be a movement crack. And then the other crack that we talked about, what I call a structural crack, would be a horizontal crack. And that crack, while it can develop in poured concrete, is mostly found in concrete block. But it is a crack that wall is no longer plumb. That crack is causing some form of movement. And as that movement occurs, I would see that in sight when I look down the wall, that eventually that wall will no longer stand plumb, will collapse. And that would be a structural crack, and that would be a crack that we definitely want to heighten the attention to our clients. And so I look again down this wall. I'm going to look for all of these elements. Around windows are very common areas that will also have cracking. I do have a beautiful crack right down here at the corner of the window. I have another one at the top of the window. These are stress points. These are the points that we've added to this wall, so it's no longer a solid concrete wall. We've put this glass in the middle of it. But what ends up happening, we should have steel inside of that holds that area together. I'm just looking at it for areas of moisture. What's interesting in moisture, though, is I do have this one spot right here. And you see how I've got just a little bit of white around this dark staining, and the white does come off in my fingers. So there's a little bit of efflorescence, and that efflorescence is the byproduct of water coming through the wall, but it's evaporated, and by the time it's here, it's vapor and it's no longer moisture. But it is just a history of moisture in this area. I take a note of it, I take a picture of it, and I would talk about efflorescence noted on the back wall underneath the window. Monitor as necessary. Same as I would take a picture of that repair. My guess would be there was some form of blemish in the wall during construction, and they'd rather have this patch of cement here than they would the blemish. Nothing out of the ordinary, nothing structural, but certainly something, if you are documenting in your report, something you just want to take a picture of and just document. But there's no need to heighten or cause any issue with it. Speaking of cause, when you see something like this, or you see a little bit of efflorescence, an inspection does not have to create causation. An inspection is simply noting facts. We have a typical crack here. I've got a repaired spot here. I've got efflorescence here. We don't have to identify where it came from, why it happened. That's very important to think about when you're doing any portion of your inspection, but especially in foundation inspections when you think of the cost and the aggravation involved with structural repairs. And I would continue the same effort around this entire foundation. I think we should go look at the beam pocket. I think that could be exciting as well. We talked about the basic principles of structure and those elements, the perimeter support, the inner support, the floor support, the wall support, the roof support. Now when I come in here, this is where our inner support conjoins into the perimeter support. We have to be able to support that beam somewhere. That's typically done with a beam pocket. If you can look inside, great. If you can't look inside, that's fine. We're going to report on what we can see, documenting everything. I've got a crack right here. This crack happens to be in this same area as the beam pocket. This is the big structure spot holding up this inner support. Well, if this fails, would not this fail? And so I got to really pay attention to this crack, and I see the crack comes up the wall and it stops, then moves over a ½ inch and goes up the wall and stops, then moves over. It's a shrinkage crack. It's not a structural crack. So I don't see anything interfering with the structure underneath this inner support system, the beam and column. But that would be something I'm going to look for and try to identify as I walk through this entire perimeter. And then I come a little bit further over here and I see where I've got a basin. Now within the foundation, sometimes we do have dewatering systems. These systems are usually called sump pumps or sump systems. So surrounding our perimeter is a typically an underdrain or a corrugated perforated plastic pipe. And that pipe would dewater the foundation, bring that water in, drop it into this basin, and then there would be a pump that evacuates it out. We don't have a pump, we have a basin. In the ComSOP, we do not have to test sump pumps. In the ComSOP, we do not have to take and open anything that's inaccessible or not readily accessible. See all this? That prevents me from opening this up. You could move it if you desire. In my case, I don't even have a pump. This building's drainage is sufficient enough they haven't had to need the pump. So my assumption, and we all know what assumptions are, my guess would be the municipality required the basin and they required the drainage. But since it's not necessarily needed in this building, they haven't finished it or needed it. But it's ready for the future. So I would take a picture of it, say home for the sump pump, or this is where the sump pit is. Take a picture of my obstructions, and I would continue on with my foundation inspection. In this particular unit that we're in, our foundation stops here. This is a finished wall that goes across. I would take a picture of that, look for moisture, and then that would typically end my structural inspection. So again, think about the structure as a totality. I'm looking at the perimeter, the inner support, the floor, the walls, and the roof. And I've looked at all that from the outside, I've walked it, and now I've come inside, and I've punctuated this inspection with talking about really nothing extraordinary going on for my client. Follow the ComSOP, make a steady routine, and follow your routine every time, and you'll be able to perform an excellent foundation inspection.